The wind howled across the empty prairie, carrying snow like whispers of something long forgotten. It had been 3 months. 3 long months of waiting, hoping, and holding on to a promise written in careful ink on thin paper. He had read her letters so many times that the words lived inside him now. Every mile he rode brought those words closer to truth, or so he believed. The town was smaller than he expected. A handful of wooden buildings stood against the cold, their windows dim and quiet as if the place itself was holding its breath. His horse slowed as they reached the edge of a weathered cabin, set apart from the rest. Something about it felt wrong. Not abandoned, but not alive either. The kind of silence that settles when hope has been stretched too far. He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching against the snow. The sky was fading into a dull orange, the sun sinking low like it had no strength left to climb back up. He stood there for a moment, staring at the cabin door, his gloved hand tightening around the folded letter in his pocket. Her last words echoed in his mind. She had written that she would be waiting, that she would stand by the door when he arrived. But the door was closed. He stepped forward, slow and careful, as if the ground itself might give way beneath him. The cold bit through his coat, but he barely felt it. His focus was fixed on that door, on the quiet that pressed in from all sides. He knocked once. The sound was hollow, swallowed quickly by the wind. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. A flicker of unease crept in, sharp and unwelcome. He glanced around, half expecting someone to appear, to tell him he had the wrong place. But there was no one. Just the endless stretch of white and the low whistle of the wind. Pushing the door open, he stepped inside. The air was colder than it should have been, the kind of cold that comes from neglect. The room was simple. A small table, a chair, a bed in the corner. Everything looked untouched, yet something felt off, like time had stopped without warning. His eyes moved quickly, searching, hoping, then he saw it. Near the doorway, just outside, partly covered by drifting snow. He turned sharply and stepped back out, his breath catching in his throat. There she was, curled against an old suitcase, her body still, her face pale beneath a dusting of frost. Her hair was tangled, her dress worn thin from travel and waiting. She looked smaller than he imagined, fragile in a way that made his chest tighten. For a moment he couldn't move. This was not how it was supposed to be. He had imagined many things during those long months. A smile at the door, a shy greeting. Maybe even laughter once the awkwardness passed. Not this, never this. He dropped to his knees beside her, the snow soaking through his trousers. His gloved hand hovered for a second before gently touching her shoulder. She didn't stir. The wind picked up again, louder now, as if urging him to hurry or to leave. He leaned closer, searching her face for any sign of life, any small movement that would tell him he wasn't too late. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice rough from the cold and something deeper. "I'm here." No response. His heart pounded harder, a heavy, uneven rhythm that filled his ears. He brushed the snow from her hair, his fingers trembling despite himself. The suitcase beneath her cheek looked worn, like it had carried everything she owned across miles of unforgiving land. 3 months. She had waited 3 months. And now, as the last light of day slipped away, he realized he might have come just a little too late. His hand moved from her shoulder to her wrist, pressing gently as if afraid the truth might break under too much force. For a second there was nothing but the cold against his skin. Then, faint and unsteady, he felt it, a pulse, weak but there. He let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. "You're still here," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Carefully, he slid one arm beneath her back and the other under her knees. She was lighter than she should have been, as if the long journey and lonely waiting had taken pieces of her along the way. Snow clung to her dress as he lifted her, and her head rolled slightly against his arm. The sight made his jaw tighten. Inside the cabin, he pushed the door shut with his boot and laid her gently on the bed. The thin blanket there was stiff with cold, barely any help at all. He moved quickly, feeding what little wood he could find into the small stove in the corner. The flame struggled at first, then slowly began to grow, casting a weak but welcome glow across the room. He glanced back at her. She hadn't moved. He knelt beside the bed and brushed more snow from her hair, careful this time, like she might feel it. Up close, he could see how tired she looked. Not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Her lips were pale, her breathing shallow, each breath coming like it had to fight its way through. "You should have been inside," he said under his breath. "Why were you out there?" There was no answer, only the soft crackle of the fire behind him. His eyes drifted to the suitcase he had carried in after her. It sat near the door now, scuffed and worn, its corners darkened from travel. For a moment he hesitated. It felt wrong to go through her things, but something about the way she had been lying there, holding onto it even in the cold, made him think it mattered. He opened it slowly. Inside were only a few belongings. A folded dress, neatly kept despite everything. A small bundle of letters tied together with a thin piece of string. And beneath them a photograph, slightly bent at the edges. He picked it up, holding it closer to the firelight. It was her. He recognized her face, softer in the picture, with a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her stood a small house, nothing like the wide-open land around this cabin. It looked like a place filled with people, with noise and life. He set the photo aside and reached for the letters. His fingers paused when he realized they were not all from him. The top few were his. He knew the handwriting, the way his words slanted across the page. But beneath those were others, written in a different hand. The ink was darker, the strokes sharper. He untied the string and unfolded one. The words were short, almost rushed. It spoke of money owed, of time running out, of a journey that had to be made no matter the cost. There was no kindness in the writing, no warmth, just pressure. His brow tightened as he read another. This one mentioned the marriage arrangement, but not in the way he had understood it. It spoke of it like a solution, a way out of something she couldn't escape. He leaned back slightly, the paper still in his hand. "What did you get yourself into?" he muttered. Behind him, the fire cracked louder, filling the silence for a moment. He looked over his shoulder at her again. She lay just as still as before, but now he noticed something he hadn't seen outside. A faint bruise along her wrist, partly hidden beneath her sleeve. His expression hardened. This was no simple story of a bride traveling west for a new life. There was something else tied to it. Something that had followed her all the way here. A sudden sound outside made him freeze. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but it was there, the creak of wood, the soft shift of something moving where nothing should be. He stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his side, his eyes fixed on the door, listening. The sound came again, this time closer. He didn't move at first. The sound settled into the walls like a warning, quiet but clear. The wind had a way of playing tricks out here, bending loose boards and whispering through cracks, but this felt different, too steady, too careful. His gaze stayed locked on the door while his thoughts raced. Whoever had written those letters might not be far behind. The idea pressed hard against his chest. A debt, a forced journey, a marriage that wasn't as simple as it seemed. None of it sat right. Behind him, she let out a faint, uneven breath. It was small, but it pulled him back. He turned quickly and knelt beside the bed again. Her eyes fluttered, barely opening like she was trying to rise from somewhere far away. "You're safe," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure it was true. "You hear me? You're inside now." Her lips parted, but no words came. Just a weak breath that carried a hint of fear. Her hand twitched slightly against the blanket, then stilled again. He hesitated before placing his hand over hers. It felt cold, but not as lifeless as before. "You don't need to talk," he added. "Just stay with me." Another sound came from outside. This time it wasn't the creak of wood, it was heavier, like a slow step pressing into snow. He stood again, more certain now that someone was out there. His eyes scanned the cabin quickly. One door, one small window, no easy way out if trouble came in. He stepped closer to the window and wiped away the frost with his sleeve, peering into the dim light outside. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving behind a pale glow that barely touched the ground. For a moment he saw nothing. Then, near the fence line, a shape shifted. It was distant, almost blending into the fading light, but it was there, a figure, standing still, watching. His grip tightened. So it wasn't just bad luck that brought her here half frozen. Someone had followed. Or maybe they had been waiting longer than he had. He stepped back from the window, keeping his movements slow. The last thing he wanted was to show panic. Whoever was out there already had the advantage of time and distance. His mind worked through what little he knew. The letter spoke of pressure, of someone pushing her toward this marriage like it was a transaction. That meant she hadn't come west just for a fresh start. She had been sent, maybe forced. And now that same shadow had reached this place. He looked over at her again. The bruise on her wrist seemed darker in the firelight. A sign she had struggled at some point, maybe recently. "Did you run?" he whispered, though she couldn't answer. Is that why they're here? The thought settled heavy. If she had tried to escape, then whoever was outside wasn't here to check on her well-being. They were here to take something back. Or someone. He moved quietly toward the door and rested his hand against it, feeling the cold seep through the wood. The outside had gone still again. No footsteps now, no movement. That silence was worse. Behind him, her breathing grew uneven again. He glanced back and saw her shifting slightly, as if caught in a restless dream. A faint sound escaped her throat, something close to a word but not clear enough to understand. He stepped back to her side. "You're not alone anymore," he said, firmer this time. "Whatever brought you here, we'll face it." But even as he spoke, he knew he was stepping into something bigger than he had planned. This wasn't just about a mail-order bride and a delayed arrival. It was tied to something darker, something that had already left its mark on her. Her eyes opened again, just a little wider this time. They moved slowly, searching until they found him. For a brief second, there was recognition there. And then fear followed close behind. Her lips moved, forming a single fragile word. "Don't!" The way she said it wasn't a plea, it was a warning. Before he could ask what she meant, a sharp knock hit the door, not loud. Not rushed, but certain. And whoever stood on the other side did not knock like a stranger. The knock came again, steady and patient, like the person on the other side had all the time in the world. It wasn't the kind of knock that asked permission. It was the kind that expected the door to open. He didn't move right away. His eyes shifted from the door back to the bed. She was watching him now, barely holding on to consciousness, but the fear in her eyes had sharpened. Her fingers tightened weakly around the blanket, as if trying to hold herself together. "Don't open it," she whispered, her voice thin but urgent. The words settled heavy in the room. Another knock followed, a little firmer this time. The wood gave a faint tremor under his hand. Whoever stood outside knew he was in there. He stepped closer to the door, lowering his voice. "You expecting company?" he called out, keeping his tone calm even though his chest felt tight. For a moment there was no reply, just the wind brushing against the cabin. Then a voice came through, low and controlled. "I believe something of mine is inside." The words were polite, but there was no warmth in them. His jaw tightened. He glanced back again. She had closed her eyes, but her breathing had grown quicker, like she was bracing for something she already understood. He turned back to the door. "You got the wrong place?" he said. A pause followed. Then a soft chuckle from outside, dry and humorless. "I don't think so." A young woman arrived not long ago, traveling alone, carrying a suitcase that doesn't belong to her anymore. His eyes flicked to the suitcase near the wall. So that was it, not just a forced marriage. Something tied to that case, something worth chasing across miles of frozen land. He spoke again, firmer now. "She's not going anywhere?" Silence answered him, but it wasn't empty. It felt like something was shifting just beyond the door, like a decision being made. Behind him, she stirred again. This time, she pushed herself slightly upright, her strength fading even as she tried. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "They won't stop." He walked back to her side quickly, lowering himself so she didn't have to strain to see him. "Then help me understand," he said. "What's in that suitcase?" Her eyes drifted toward it, and for a moment something changed in her expression. "Not just fear, but guilt. It's not mine," she said. "I was told to carry it. Said it would clear everything. Debts, trouble, all of it. And you believed that. I didn't have a choice." The words came out sharper than before, fueled by something deeper than exhaustion. "They said if I didn't go through with it, if I didn't come west and marry, it would get worse for me. For people back home." He sat back slightly, letting that sink in. So the mail-order bride story was only part of it. A cover, a way to move something across distance without raising questions. And when did you realize something was wrong? Her lips trembled. When they didn't stop following, the knock came again, louder this time. Last chance, the voice outside called, still calm, still certain. You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be. He stood slowly, his decision settling in place. This wasn't just about keeping a promise anymore. It was about choosing a side. He looked around the cabin, measuring the space, the distance, the weight of what could happen next. One door, one way in. No backup, just him, her, and whatever truth was locked inside that worn suitcase. He walked to it and placed his hand on the handle. For a second he hesitated. If what she said was true, opening it might change everything. It might explain why someone would chase her across states, why they would stand outside in the cold, waiting without fear. Behind him, she shook her head weakly. "Don't," she said again, her voice barely holding. But the man at the door spoke once more, this time with an edge that hadn't been there before. "You open that case and there's no going back for either of you. That was enough." His grip tightened, and he flipped the latches open. At the same moment, the door behind him rattled hard, like a hand had slammed against it with force. The fire flickered wildly, shadows jumping across the walls as the tension in the room snapped tight. And whatever lay inside that suitcase was about to decide everything. The latches snapped open, the sound sharp in the tight space. For a moment, he didn't lift the lid. The door behind him shook again under a heavy push, the wood groaning in protest. The man outside had lost patience. He opened the suitcase. Inside, neatly wrapped in cloth, were small bundles that caught the firelight in a dull shine, not clothes. Not personal things. Coins and stamped pieces of metal, marked in a way that spoke of value. Enough to clear debts, enough to ruin lives if stolen. Tucked beside them was a folded document, official-looking, with names and figures written in careful lines. So that was the truth. She hadn't just been sent west as a mail-order bride. She had been used to carry something worth chasing, something dangerous enough to bring men to her door. Another hard hit the cabin, the latch on the door straining now. He closed the suitcase slowly and stood. His mind was clear in a way it hadn't been before. This was never her burden to carry. It had been forced onto her, wrapped up in promises she couldn't refuse. He turned back to her. "This ends tonight," he said. Her eyes searched his face, fear still there, but something else rising with it, hope, fragile, but real. "You don't know them," she said softly. "They don't let go," he gave a small shake of his head. "They picked the wrong place to come looking." The door slammed once more, louder than before. The wood cracked near the frame. He moved quickly, grabbing the suitcase and setting it near the table. Then he stepped to the door and lifted the bar into place, reinforcing it as best he could. It wouldn't hold forever, but it might hold long enough. "Listen to me," he said, turning back to her. "When I open that door, you stay here. No matter what you hear." Her lips parted as if to argue, but she didn't. She nodded, just once. He took a steady breath, then reached for the door. This time he opened it. Cold air rushed in, along with the figure waiting outside. The man stood tall, wrapped in a dark coat, his face calm in a way that didn't match the situation. His eyes moved past him for a brief second, searching the cabin, then returned. "Smart choice," the man said evenly. "Now step aside." He didn't move. "It doesn't belong to you," the man continued, his voice still controlled. "You don't want trouble over something like this." He held his ground. "You brought the trouble to her," he replied. "That ends now." For the first time, a hint of irritation crossed the man's face. "You think this is about her?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had led to this moment. Then slowly the man's expression shifted again, not to anger, but to calculation. "You don't understand what you're standing in the way of," he said. "That case belongs to people far beyond this town. Hand it over and you walk away. Both of you." Behind him, the fire cracked softly, a reminder of the small space they stood in and what it now held. He shook his head. "No." The word was simple, but it carried weight. Another long pause followed. Then the man let out a slow breath, glancing once more toward the inside of the cabin. Whatever he saw there seemed to change something. Maybe it was the determination in his stance or the fact that she was no longer alone. Finally, the man stepped back. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "But you've made your choice." He turned and walked into the fading light, his figure disappearing slowly into the open land beyond the fence. The wind filled the silence he left behind. He stood there a moment longer, watching, making sure the man was truly gone. Only then did he close the door and secure it again. Inside, the cabin felt different. Still cold, still worn, but no longer empty. He walked back to her side, setting the suitcase down out of reach, like it no longer held power over her. She looked up at him, her eyes clearer now, though still tired. "They'll come back," she said. "Maybe," he answered. "But next time we'll be ready." She studied him, as if trying to understand why he had stayed, why he had chosen this fight. "You barely know me," she whispered. He gave a small, tired smile. "I know enough." The fire burned a little stronger now, pushing back the cold inch by inch. Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind settling into something quieter. For the first time since he arrived, the silence didn't feel heavy. She shifted slightly, her strength returning little by little. "I thought I was alone," she said. He pulled a chair closer and sat beside her. "Not anymore." The suitcase sat in the corner, no longer just a burden, but a turning point. What had been meant to trap her had instead brought her somewhere she might finally have a chance to start over. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still questions, still risks tied to what they now knew. But for the first time, the path didn't feel forced, it felt chosen. And as the night settled around the small cabin, the promise that had started with ink on paper began to take on a different meaning. Not just an agreement, but something stronger, something worth fighting for.